Why was she even there, if no one cared to listen? The hum of the ceiling fans drowned beneath the low murmur of voices. Maps spread across the steel briefing table like a battlefield of paper and ink. 12 men leaned in, pointing, debating. Their words clashed: coordinates, exit routes, loadouts, but not a single eye turned toward her. Captain Lena Ward kept her arms folded. The sleeves of her flight suit rolled just past her elbows. She had spoken once already, an hour ago. A small, careful suggestion about the terrain north of the river and the wind shear predicted after dusk. A few chuckles answered her. One of the sergeants smirked and shifted the topic as if she'd never opened her mouth. So she stayed silent, but silence, she'd learned, wasn't the same as agreement. Outside the operations tent, dusk pressed against the horizon, orange bleeding into deep cobalt. The air held the faint, metallic tang of jet fuel drifting from the line of parked Black Hawks. Lena's fingers traced the edge of the table, grounding herself in the rough texture of the wood. She remembered her father's voice on the porch back home, telling her once, "Sometimes, the people who matter most won't be in the room when you're proving yourself. Sometimes it's just you." But she hadn't expected it to feel this lonely. Major Collins' voice boomed across the tent. "We're wheels up at 300. Main assault team moves east. Support squad cuts north through the ravine. Clean, simple, no surprises." Lena's gaze flicked to the satellite image pinned to the corkboard behind him. Simple. The North Ravine was unpredictable: steep drops, sudden gusts, blind corners. She could see the storm lines forming in her mind like scars across the landscape. But every time she considered speaking again, her heartbeat thumped louder. She glanced at Lieutenant Harris beside her. He was young, green. His jaw tightened when Collins dismissed her earlier point. Maybe he saw it too, but Harris wasn't about to be the one to challenge the plan. Not here. Not in front of men who'd been in the field longer than he'd been alive. A sudden roar outside, the engine test of an Apache, shook the tent walls. Conversations paused for a heartbeat, then resumed. Lena took a breath, the kind you take when you're about to walk into a room full of closed doors. "Sir," she said, her voice even. Collins didn't look at her. "The ravine isn't stable. Wind shear patterns shifted after last week's storm. If you send a squad through there without adjusting for downdrafts, you could lose them before they make contact." The tent fell quiet, but not in a way that gave her power. A corporal in the back chuckled under his breath. Someone muttered, "Here we go again." Collins finally raised an eyebrow. "Noted, Captain, we'll adjust." But his tone made it clear he wouldn't. The meeting wrapped quickly after. Men filed out, laughing, boots crunching gravel. Harris hesitated at the flap, glanced back at her. Something unspoken flickered in his eyes, respect or maybe pity. Lena stayed behind, letting the room empty. The maps were still there, the ravine etched in black ink like a scar. She traced it with her finger, the weight of being unheard pressing against her ribs. She thought of her brother. Michael Ward, Army Ranger, 2 years older, the one who'd first taught her to shoot, to fly the simulator in their uncle's barn. He died on a mission 3 years ago, ambushed in terrain not unlike this. The report had said unexpected weather interference. A polite way of saying no one had listened to the warning. She joined flight school after his funeral. Not to prove herself, at least, that's what she told everyone. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, she knew she'd been chasing his ghost. She stepped out into the night. The air was crisp, cool against her face. The stars above stretched wide and endless, a sky too big for her grief. Helicopters lined the tarmac like sleeping beasts. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the river, men with rifles were waiting. Lena walked toward her bird, a Black Hawk named Talon 3, and rested a hand on its nose. The metal was cold, solid, reliable even when people were. "Hey, Ward." She turned. Sergeant Ruiz approached, broad-shouldered, grizzled, a man whose face looked carved from stone. He'd served with her brother once. "You were right," he said quietly, glancing back toward the tent. "About the ravine, but Collins, you know how he is." She gave a tight nod. "Yeah." Ruiz shifted his weight. "Doesn't mean you're wrong, just means you'll have to save their asses later." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Story of my life." He squeezed her shoulder, then left. Alone again, Lena climbed into the cockpit. The interior smelled of grease, canvas, and the faint sweetness of hydraulic fluid. She flicked on the auxiliary power and let the soft hum fill the silence. In the glow of the console lights, her reflection looked back at her, a woman who had learned to hide anger behind composure. She whispered to herself, "You'll see." Hours later, the mission began. The night was velvet black by the time the Black Hawks lifted off, blades whipping the air into a frenzy. The assault team rode ahead, their laughter forced, their nerves hidden behind bravado. Lena flew Talon 3 low, skimming the tree line. Her co-pilot Harris monitored the instruments, his fingers twitching over the controls. "Wind's picking up," he said. "I know," Lena replied. She could feel it through the vibrations, a subtle warning. They passed over the river, its surface rippling like dark silk. To the north, lightning flickered on the horizon, silent, distant. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes in. "Alpha Team to command, we've got turbulence in the ravine." A voice crackled over comms. Collins' voice answered, steady but strained. "Stay on course." Lena bit her lip. She switched frequencies. "Alpha, this is Talon 3, climb out now, downdraft is forming." "Negative, Talon 3, Alpha replied. Orders are to push through." Then came the scream of alarms. On her radar, one of the support choppers dipped, too fast. A sudden downdraft yanked it toward the ravine wall. "Brace," someone shouted over the comms. Lena reacted before thinking. She banked hard, throttling up, her Black Hawk slicing through the turbulent air. Harris gripped the seat. She dove under the falling chopper, her rotors a whisper from the jagged rock. The world narrowed to a tunnel of flashing lights and roaring wind. Metal groaned as she steadied her bird beneath the plummeting squad. "Hook your line," she barked over comms. A frantic crewman from the distressed chopper deployed a cable connecting to Lena's. For a heartbeat, the two machines were tethered, one falling, one clawing skyward. Her muscles strained, her teeth clenched. The storm snarled around them. Then stability. The chopper above leveled, engines screaming. The ravine released them with a violent shudder. Both helicopters climbed, battered but intact. "Holy Talon 3, you just..." Harris started, but his voice broke. Lena didn't answer. Her hands trembled on the controls. Somewhere deep inside, grief and vindication warred. Collins' voice came over the comms, quieter now. "Talon 3, good work." The words were reluctant, almost grudging. But she didn't need his praise. As they regrouped beyond the hills, the radio chatter dimmed. Lena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the storm still danced in the distance. She thought of Michael again, of the day he'd taught her to fly the simulator, laughing when she'd crashed the digital Black Hawk into a pixelated mountain. "Flying isn't about control," he'd said. "It's about trust. Trust the machine, trust yourself, even when no one else does." In the quiet between transmissions, Lena whispered, "Still with me, huh?" Harris pretended not to hear, but he glanced at her, and for the first time that night, respect, real respect, shone in his eyes. They weren't out of danger yet. Beyond the ridgeline, enemy positions waited. But for the first time since that briefing table, Lena felt something steady inside her. Not pride, not yet, just the beginning of it. The mission wasn't over. The hardest choice hadn't even arrived. And somewhere deep in the night, a voice she'd been trying to ignore, the quiet, insistent part of herself that refused to stay silent, reminded her, this was only the beginning. How quickly can silence turn into a warning you can feel in your bones? The radios had gone quiet, too quiet. Lena kept her Black Hawk low, tracing the shadow of the ridge as the storm rolled closer. Beyond the windshield, the world stretched in bruised colors, violet clouds swallowing the moonlight, jagged peaks like broken teeth against the horizon. The night air had a taste now, ozone and dust, the metallic tang of something about to break. She glanced at Harris. His hands gripped the console tight, knuckles pale. He'd been in combat simulations, maybe a few low-risk extractions, but this was different. You could see it in the way his breath fogged the glass. "You're thinking too loud," she said softly. His startled laugh was too quick, too brittle. "Just processing. You ever get used to this?" "No," she said, "and you shouldn't." A crackle on the comms, Ruiz's voice, low, strained. "Alpha is reporting movement on the far slope. Might be nothing, but it doesn't feel like nothing." Lena adjusted their course. Below, the ravine opened into a plateau of pale rock. She flicked a switch, dimmed the cockpit lights. The storm's first drops pattered against the canopy, soft as whispered footsteps. "Command, this is Talon 3, she said. "We're adjusting west to scout the ridge line. Weather's deteriorating faster than forecasted." Collins' reply came sluggish, a beat too slow. "Copy Talon 3, hold formation, do not engage." She frowned. He didn't sound certain anymore. Harris broke the silence. "You think he'll admit you were right?" Lena gave a faint, humorless smile. "Not tonight." But the doubt was already creeping into her voice. They banked left, the Black Hawk shuddering in a sudden gust. The storm was swallowing the sky now, lightning silently blooming, a flicker of daylight stolen in an instant. Then, without warning, tracer fire stitched the dark ahead of them. "Contact," Ruiz shouted over comms. Gunfire echoed across the canyon, brittle and sharp, ricocheting off stone. Lena's training took over. She dropped altitude, skimming the rock face. Harris swore under his breath. "Alpha's pinned," Ruiz barked. "Multiple positions on the ridge, unseen numbers." "Talon 3 to Alpha, copy your location," Lena said, already punching coordinates into the nav display. The next few seconds blurred. Bullets sparking off stone, distant shouts, the steady whoop-whoop-whoop of rotor blades cutting the storm-thick air. She felt a familiar burn in her chest, the kind that was part fear, part anger. Michael's last mission report flashed unbidden in her mind. Unexpected weather interference, ambushed in unfamiliar terrain. "Not tonight." She nosed the Black Hawk toward the firefight, using the canyon walls for cover. Harris loaded the door gun, his hands shaking but steady enough. The plateau came into view. Alpha team crouched behind boulders, muzzle flashes licking the dark. Enemy silhouettes darted across the ridge, ghostly, half seen between lightning strikes. "Hold on," she muttered, pushing the throttle. The helicopter surged forward, rising just enough to give Harris a firing angle. The door gun roared, carving arcs of light through the storm. Enemy fire faltered. For a heartbeat, the plateau seemed to breathe. "Alpha, move," Lena ordered. The squad scrambled toward the extraction point, boots slipping on wet rock. Ruiz's voice grunted over comms, breathless. "We're moving. 2 wounded." A fresh burst of gunfire raked the plateau. Bullets pinged off the Black Hawk's armor, a hollow, ringing sound that always made Lena's stomach tighten. She pivoted, using the helicopter as a shield, keeping her bird between Alpha and the shooters. It wasn't doctrine. It wasn't even smart. But she wasn't about to let another report end like Michael's. Harris fired again, a ragged shout leaving his throat. Then silence. The ridge emptied. Whether they'd fallen back or were just waiting, she couldn't tell. "Alpha status. 2 wounded stable, 1 limping, but we're clear for now," Ruiz said. "Copy," she replied, her voice calm even as her pulse thundered. They loaded the wounded, the Black Hawk settling just long enough for boots and gear to clatter aboard. As Ruiz hauled the last man in, lightning split the sky, an electric scar across blackness, and for an instant, Lena saw her own reflection in the windshield. Rain streaked, jaw tight, eyes hard. It wasn't pride she felt. It was defiance, quiet, heavy, and edged with grief. The storm intensified on their return course, rain hammering the rotors, thunder rolling like distant artillery. Inside the helicopter, the men were unusually quiet. Even the wounded didn't complain. Harris finally spoke, low enough only she could hear. "You saved them." She didn't answer. Saving them wasn't the point. When they landed back at base, the landing pads glistened under floodlights, water pooling in shallow depressions. Medics rushed the wounded away. Collins was there, collar soaked, jaw tight. "Ward," he said, approaching. She braced herself for criticism, for some excuse to diminish what she'd done. Instead, he just stared at her a moment, then said, "We'll debrief at 700. His voice was clipped, but something had shifted, just enough to notice. Ruiz stepped past him, pausing to give her a subtle nod. Gratitude, wordless but undeniable. The others dispersed. The storm eased to a drizzle, a soft hiss against the tarmac. Alone again, Lena stood by Talon 3. She reached out, letting the rain gather on her palm. The Black Hawk loomed beside her, streaked with mud and grit, a survivor like her. She should have felt relief, but the quiet pressed in, and with it came an old ache. Michael had been here once, standing on some forgotten landing pad, soaked to the bone, thinking the worst was over, and it hadn't been. She closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, the thought she'd been avoiding returned. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something worse. At 700, the debriefing tent smelled of wet canvas and strong coffee. The men sat in a loose circle, exhaustion etched into their faces. Collins spoke first, voice rough from a sleepless night. "Last night was a near disaster," he admitted. "The storm shifted. Enemy positions were better prepared than intel suggested. We got lucky." Lena stared at the table. Lucky? That wasn't luck, it was listening, even when no one else did. Collins' eyes flicked to her briefly, then back to the group. "We regroup, adjust. Second phase is still a go tonight. But," he hesitated, then said, "we'll take Ward's terrain assessment seriously this time." A few men exchanged surprised looks. Harris kept his expression neutral, but Lena caught the quick upward twitch at the corner of his mouth. As the meeting dispersed, Ruiz lingered. "You good?" he asked. "Fine," she said automatically. He studied her. "You don't have to carry Michael's ghost every time you fly." She stiffened. "Who says I do?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Lena unrolled a small, weathered map, Michael's. He'd marked it with notes in his messy scrawl. Wind patterns, escape routes, warnings no one had heeded. She traced one of the lines. The ink faded to near invisibility. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harris: "You kept us alive. Whatever Collins says, we know it." She stared at the words a long time before replying. "Get some sleep. Tonight will be worse." Evening came fast. The second phase was riskier, deep infiltration, closer to the enemy's stronghold. The storm had left the terrain unstable, the rivers swollen. Collins wanted 2 choppers running supply and medevac support while Alpha pressed forward. Lena pre-flighted Talon 3, her movements precise, methodical. Every switch flipped was a small act of control in a world where control was an illusion. Harris joined her on the tarmac, helmet under his arm. "You really think tonight going to be worse?" She glanced at the horizon, clouds gathering again like bruises. "Yeah." He swallowed. "Then why are we still going?" "Because someone has to." They lifted off under a bruised twilight sky. The hills below glistened from the storm, rivers cutting silver scars through the valleys. The radios buzzed with routine chatter, but beneath it, Lena felt the hum of something else, unease, like static under a song. Half an hour in, Ruiz's voice cut through the comms. "Alpha's making contact with the outer perimeter. Resistance heavier than expected." Gunfire bled faintly through the transmission. Lena tightened her grip on the cyclic. She could hear the storm returning, a low growl on the horizon. Then another voice, a whisper almost lost in static. It was Harris, but softer, as if speaking to himself. "We're flying into the same kind of trap Michael did." She didn't correct him. Ahead, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the ridge line they had to cross. The mission was still theirs to lose, and though she'd been ignored once, she knew the moment was coming, the one where her voice would decide everything. She just didn't know yet what it would cost. How far can a storm stretch before it breaks everything holding the world together? The lightning lit the valley like a photograph, bright, sharp, gone. In that brief flash, Lena saw the river swollen, the banks crumbling, trees bent under the wind's weight. The storm wasn't just weather now. It was a presence, a waiting predator. The Black Hawk vibrated under her hands, every tremor of the air transferring into her bones. Harris scanned the monitors, his lips pressed into a tight line. "Alpha's pinned again," Ruiz's voice came through, crackling, interrupted by static and distant gunfire. "We need air cover fast." Lena swung the chopper left, carving through the dark sky. The enemy had anticipated them this time, set traps where they shouldn't have known to. Someone had tipped them off. "Command, this is Talon 3, adjusting vector. Storm is worsening. Recommend abort," she said. Collins' voice came back sharp like a blade. "Negative. Mission continues. Alpha holds that line or we lose everything." She swallowed her frustration. She'd been here before, men refusing to yield even when the sky itself warned them. She banked hard, pushing Talon 3 through a narrow canyon. Harris gripped the overhead handle, his knuckles bone white. "Think they're feeding intel to the other side?" he asked. "Feels that way," Lena muttered. The first tracer rounds appeared like fireflies, tiny sparks that became screaming streaks of light. They whipped past the windshield, close enough to smell the acrid tang of burning metal. "Returning fire," Harris yelled, swinging the door gun. The roar of bullets filled the cabin, a violent percussion against the thunder. Down below, Alpha Team scrambled for cover. Lena dipped the nose, providing suppressing fire while Ruiz's men regrouped. The sound of rain on metal mixed with the stutter of gunfire, a chaotic, desperate music. Her mind flickered again to Michael. The report's wording, "unexpected interference," felt like an accusation now. Had someone betrayed him too? Another burst of lightning exposed a ridge ahead, too close, too high. She yanked the cyclic, narrowly avoiding collision. The Black Hawk's rotors clipped the tip of a tree, splintering branches into the night. "Ward," Harris shouted. "I see it." Her heart slammed against her ribs. The storm's wind shifted suddenly, slamming the helicopter sideways. Lena fought the controls, her breath coming in sharp bursts. They emerged over a plateau littered with boulders and shattered pine. Alpha's position was barely visible, flares guttering in the wind. She keyed the comm. "Alpha, mark your target positions." Red smoke plumed through the rain, curling like a wounded animal. She lined up the approach, but her instincts screamed. Too exposed, too obvious. "Something off," she whispered. Then she saw it, glints of metal farther down the slope. A secondary ambush, hidden until now. "They're boxed in," Harris breathed. Lena's stomach dropped. If Alpha advanced, they'd be slaughtered. Retreating meant crossing the open plateau. "Command, this is Talon 3. Recommend reroute. Enemy has secondary." Collins cut her off. "We hold, push through." She slammed her fist lightly against the console, a muted, frustrated thud. She thought of her father's words about dignity and silence, but sometimes silence wasn't enough. She switched channels to Ruiz. "I can give you 30 seconds of cover. Pull back south. Don't wait for permission." A pause, then Ruiz's gravelly voice. "Copy that, Talon 3." She dove the Black Hawk low, skimming the treetops. Harris unleashed a torrent of gunfire, sparks lighting the rain. Enemy shooters ducked, scrambled. Alpha dashed for the tree line, two men dragging a wounded comrade between them. A rocket streaked upward, a hiss like tearing cloth. "Missile," Harris shouted. Lena pulled hard, banking right. The Black Hawk groaned under the strain, alarms blaring. The missile passed so close she felt the heat through the fuselage. Adrenaline sharpened everything. The smell of wet earth, the metallic tang of sweat on her lips, the pounding roar of the rotors. The second missile came silently. She saw it too late. It streaked from the ridge faster than thought. She dove, but the shockwave still hit them, a brutal punch that rattled her teeth. The Black Hawk lurched, one engine coughing smoke. "Engine 2's failing," Harris yelled. She steadied the controls, voice calm despite the chaos. "We're still flying." Below, Alpha vanished into the tree line, safe for now. But Lena's bird was wounded. The gauges flickered, warning lights blooming like angry eyes. "Command, Talon 3 hit, limping south. We'll make it," she said. Collins replied, his voice tense. "Understood, you did good, Ward." She didn't feel good. They limped across the valley, the storm easing as dawn approached. The first gray light crept over the mountains, revealing a world battered and raw. Lena guided Talon 3 toward a flat stretch near a creek. The chopper touched down rough, the landing jarring her bones. Harris exhaled shakily. "We're alive." She shut down the engines. The sudden silence was deafening after hours of rotors and gunfire. They stepped out into the cool dawn. Mist curled off the creek and the air smelled of wet pine. Somewhere, a lone bird called, a fragile sound in a world that had nearly ended. Harris crouched to check the damage. "We're not flying her out of here, at least not without parts we don't have." Lena studied the horizon. The ridge loomed distant, ominous. Alpha was still out there trying to regroup. The enemy would hunt them as soon as the storm broke. She pulled her map, rain-speckled and torn. Her finger traced a narrow canyon leading south, an old smuggler's route Michael had once mentioned in passing. "We're not staying," she said. "We move on foot." Harris blinked. "You're serious?" "Unless you want to wait here for whoever fired those rockets." He hesitated, then nodded. As they packed essentials, a thought gnawed at her. Someone had betrayed them. The ambush was too precise, too prepared. She replayed the briefing in her mind, the casual dismissals, the sidelong glances. Trust was thinner than the air up here. They moved along the creek, boots sinking into wet earth. The forest smelled alive, damp soil resin, the faint sweetness of wildflowers bruised by rain. Every sound seemed amplified. Dripping branches, distant thunder, the crunch of their steps. After an hour, Harris spoke. "You knew about this canyon, how?" "My brother," she said simply. He didn't press, sensing the weight behind the words. As the sun broke through clouds, shards of light spilled across the valley. For a moment, the world looked almost gentle. But Lena felt the storm still inside her, the memory of Michael, the echo of being ignored, the uneasy knowledge that someone in their ranks had set this trap. They reached a ledge overlooking the valley floor. Far below, smoke curled from where Alpha had been ambushed. The sight tightened her chest. Harris shaded his eyes. "Do you think they'll make it?" "They have to," she said quietly. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of burning fuel. It reminded her of Michael's memorial service, the folded flag, the hollow condolences, the unspoken truths. She closed her eyes briefly. "Don't let me fail them too." By midday they found a shallow cave, a brief respite. Lena sat against the rock, the chill seeping through her flight suit. Harris passed her a protein bar without a word. For a while they just listened, to the forest breathing, to their own ragged thoughts. Finally Harris said, "Collins, he doesn't know what you're carrying, does he?" She shook her head. "He wouldn't understand." "Then why keep flying for him?" She didn't answer right away. She thought of Michael, of their father's quiet pride, of the idea that some things weren't about recognition. They were about doing what was right, even if no one saw it. "Because somebody has to," she said at last. Evening approached again, shadows lengthening. Far away, a distant rumble, not thunder this time but the low growl of engines, echoed through the hills. Enemy search parties. Lena and Harris exchanged a glance. The mission wasn't just compromised, it was unraveling. And somewhere in that unraveling, she knew her voice, the one they had ignored, was the only thread holding them all together. Why do the quietest voices sometimes hold the loudest truths? The cave was dark, smelling of damp stone and the faint tang of earth. Lena crouched near the entrance, her back pressed to the wall, scanning the valley below. The sun had dipped behind clouds again, shadows creeping across the terrain like slow-moving predators. Harris unpacked a medkit, his movements deliberate. "We can patch up minor injuries, but Alpha won't make it without air support." Lena nodded, though the truth weighed heavier. Even with Talon 3 out of commission, she had to find a way to guide them. Every moment she hesitated could mean death for the men still trapped in the valley. "Do you trust me?" she asked softly, almost to herself. Harris looked up. His gaze was steady but his jaw was tight. "I trust you. You've kept us alive so far." She allowed herself a brief, bitter smile. Trust. Something her father had drilled into her from childhood. Trust only when necessary but never stop listening. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the valley. The ridge line was crawling with movement, enemy forces meticulously combing the terrain. They were learning, adapting. Someone had given them an advantage. Lena's mind raced. Every map, every terrain note, every simulation she'd run with Michael, they all came together in flashes. The enemy thought they could trap them, but she had knowledge they didn't anticipate. Knowledge no one had bothered to value at the briefing table. "We move," she whispered. Harris hesitated. "Do we risk going down there without Talon 3? "Yes," Lena said firmly. "If we wait for Talon 3, Alpha dies." The descent was precarious. The canyon walls loomed above, jagged and slick from the storm. Rain dripped in cold streams and the soil underfoot threatened to betray them with every step. Lena led, eyes sharp, ears tuned to the forest's subtle warnings. A rustle in the underbrush. She froze, hand on her sidearm. "Civilian," Harris whispered. "Unlikely," she said. "Move quietly." They pressed on, the forest thickening around them. The sounds of battle, distant gunfire, shouts, the metallic ping of bullets, remained faint but omnipresent, a haunting backdrop to their careful advance. Finally, they reached a clearing. Below, Alpha Team huddled behind a cluster of boulders, 2 men dragging a third wounded soldier. Lena counted 6 enemy fighters spread along the ridge, aiming rifles, moving like predators. Harris swallowed audibly. "We can't just run in there." "No," Lena agreed. She scanned the surroundings, every detail imprinting on her mind. A loose boulder here, a fallen tree there, wind direction, shadows shifting with the dying light. She began to whisper a plan. "Alpha will need diversion," she said. "Harris, take the left flank. Draw attention without being seen. I'll guide them from the ridge above. We can force the enemy to split their fire." Harris nodded, but she could see his hesitation. The storm, the exhaustion, the danger. It was a lot for a young operative. But trust, she reminded herself, had to carry them through. They moved into position. Lena climbed the slope silently, muscles burning, heart hammering with every careful step. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging eyes and lips. The higher she climbed, the more the valley opened beneath her, like a living map. She positioned herself behind a boulder, overlooking the enemy and Alpha's pinned position. From here, she could see everything, the movements, the gaps in cover, the timing. "On my mark," she whispered into the comm to Harris. Harris shifted silently into place, disappearing into the shadows. The enemy's attention flickered, searching for threats they couldn't see. Lena counted, breath measured. Then she signaled, and Harris triggered a small flare. The enemy reacted immediately, moving to investigate. "Now," she whispered, adrenaline slicing through her veins. Alpha moved, scrambling from cover to cover under the sudden diversion. Lena guided them with subtle gestures, hand signals, tiny shouts, all precise. One misstep, one misread shadow, and it would be over. The enemy fired, but the split attention worked. Alpha's wounded were dragged to safety, their movements coordinated with Lena's commands. Her eyes scanned constantly, anticipating threats, noting every ridge, every boulder, every exposed figure. A sudden shot rang out close. Lena ducked instinctively, heart in her throat. A sniper, hidden on a ridge she hadn't anticipated, had found her. She froze, listening. The rain muted the distant gunfire, but the snap of a twig gave her the predator's position. Lena's mind raced. She couldn't engage directly without revealing herself completely. Instead, she used the terrain. Rolling from one boulder to the next, she created the illusion of multiple positions, drawing the sniper's fire away from Alpha. Each move was calculated, every breath timed. Harris rejoined her briefly, whispering, "You're incredible. How do you know this?" "Experience," she muttered, "and necessity." Hours felt like minutes. The enemy began to retreat, frustrated by the elusive movements and sudden, coordinated Alpha advances. Lena guided each step, each cover, each breath. Finally, the last enemy soldier disappeared into the tree line. Alpha team collapsed behind cover, exhausted but alive. The wounded were stabilized. Lena exhaled slowly, letting her body release the tension she hadn't realized she'd held. Harris looked at her, awestruck. "You did it. We all made it because of you." She shook her head. "No one listened at the briefing table if I hadn't." He cut her off. "Then you wouldn't be here. You saved them. That's enough." A sudden silence fell. Even the forest seemed to pause, the storm finally breaking into a drizzle. The valley looked different now, scarred, battered, but still breathing. Lena's gaze drifted to the horizon. Somewhere in those shadows, the cost of their survival waited. Injuries, fatigue, the shadow of betrayal. She clenched her jaw. Survival alone wasn't enough, not when she knew the truth of the ambush. Ruiz approached, nodding once. "Good work, Captain. You kept your head when everyone else, well, you know." She didn't smile. She only nodded, her thoughts heavy with the knowledge that recognition could wait. Action, clarity, and survival were what mattered here, and she had given all three. Later, as they regrouped and treated wounds, Lena retreated to a small ridge to observe. The valley stretched below, quiet now, broken only by the drip of rain and the hum of insects returning to life. Her mind wandered back to Michael. He had always taught her to notice the small things, the details others ignored. That attention, that patience, had just kept half a dozen men alive tonight. She let herself sit there, rain soaking her hair, the cold seeping into her bones. Pride stirred faintly, but mostly there was relief. Relief, and the gnawing certainty that this was far from over. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the enemy would regroup. Somewhere beyond the next storm, betrayal would rear its head again. And somewhere her voice, ignored at the table, would have to speak again decisively, without hesitation. The sun broke through clouds finally, casting a pale golden light across the valley. A single bird called, tentative but insistent. Lena watched it hover for a moment, riding the air currents before disappearing behind the ridge. She took a deep breath, letting the silence fill her chest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She rose, brushing rain-soaked hair from her face. The mission wasn't over. The night ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand every ounce of wisdom, every silent instinct, and every lesson learned in the long years of being overlooked. And she would meet it, because she had no other choice. Why do the quiet ones carry the heaviest weight? The morning mist hung low over the valley, curling around boulders and the edges of trees like smoke from a long-dead fire. Lena stood at the ridge, surveying the path ahead. The storm had passed, leaving a raw, damp world behind, but the danger had not. Alpha Team was still out there, moving cautiously toward extraction points, and somewhere beyond the tree line, enemies were regrouping. She adjusted her flight suit and tightened the strap of her sidearm. Every step she would take from here demanded precision, patience, and an awareness that bordered on instinct. Every choice mattered, not just for herself, but for the men who had come to rely on her without realizing it. Harris approached quietly, his expression sober. He had stopped asking questions about why she knew what to do. Now he simply followed her lead. "They'll need guidance down the ridge," Lena said. "I'll mark safe spots, signal cover fire. We can't risk sending them blindly." Harris nodded, tightening his gloves. "You've done this before." "Yes," she admitted, "more times than anyone should." They began the careful descent. The soil was slick from rain, roots rising like hidden tripwires. Each movement was deliberate, slow, methodical. Lena's eyes scanned constantly, calculating distances, angles, cover, escape routes. She thought of Michael, the way he had trained her, always emphasizing awareness, always pointing out the traps others never saw. Alpha Team appeared below, moving in staggered formation, one dragging a wounded comrade. Lena signaled them, pointing toward a narrow path obscured by fallen branches. The team hesitated for a fraction of a second before trusting the silent guidance. A distant crack, too sharp, too precise. "Enemy snipers." Harris froze, eyes wide. Lena's hand shot out. "Move now." She had memorized every slope, every boulder, every break in the tree line. Her voice over the comms was calm but insistent. "Left, 3 paces, stop, cover, move." The team followed, silent but responsive. Every instruction counted. Every second could mean the difference between life and death. Bullets hissed past, striking the earth, kicking up sprays of mud. Lena ducked behind a boulder, heart hammering. Her mind was a controlled chaos, tracking Alpha's movements, anticipating enemy fire, calculating angles of safety. A flare erupted on the far ridge, illuminating the enemy positions. Lena's instincts screamed. This wasn't just a distraction. They were being herded into a trap. "Hold," she whispered into the comm. "Wait for my signal." Harris nodded, crouching beside her. The storm from last night had left them exposed. Mud clung to their boots, rainwater dripped from the leaves, and the valley smelled of wet pine and iron. She remembered the briefing table, every dismissive glance, every chuckle, every ignored suggestion. She had been invisible once, not anymore. Lena timed her signal carefully. With a subtle hand gesture, she directed Alpha to advance, taking advantage of the enemy's momentary confusion. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, but no one fell. Then a shot rang out, a bullet striking dangerously close. Lena's breath caught, but her hands remained steady. Every movement was measured, precise. She couldn't afford hesitation. Harris whispered, "They're everywhere." "They're not," Lena corrected quietly. "We just need to see them first." She crawled to a higher vantage point, careful not to expose herself, and spotted the enemy. Only 4 remained on the ridge, isolated, overconfident. Lena exhaled slowly. This was the opening. "Alpha," she said calmly, "flank left. I'll provide cover." The team obeyed. Bullets tore through the air, sparks against stone. Lena's voice over the comms was a lifeline, guiding, directing, protecting. Every instruction she gave was critical, every breath a tether to survival. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat mixed with rain, dripping into her eyes. The smell of gunpowder and wet earth filled her nostrils. She could hear the distant groans of the wounded, the rapid breaths of soldiers fighting fatigue and fear. The enemy fired again, miscalculating angles. Lena adjusted her aim with the door gun Harris had set up temporarily, directing suppressing fire to create openings. Alpha pressed forward, moving with renewed determination. Then a whistle. something high-pitched, almost imperceptible over the storm's remnants. Lena froze, her instincts screamed. Another sniper hidden waiting. "Move," she commanded, urgency cutting through calm. "Now." Alpha scrambled into safer positions as Harris opened fire, carefully covering their retreat. Lena's mind calculated every shot, every movement, predicting where the enemy would react next. The hidden sniper fired again. A ricochet hit near Lena, embedding in the boulder beside her. She didn't flinch. This is for Michael, she thought, feeling his presence like a shadow at her shoulder. For every warning ignored, for every voice silenced. She signaled Harris to draw fire to the right, then led the team through a narrow path descending the ridge. The sniper tracked them, but Lena's anticipation and timing ensured no one was hit. At last they reached a natural barrier, a thick grove of trees with heavy underbrush. Alpha ducked into cover, breathing heavily. The wounded were stabilized. Lena allowed herself a brief pause, hands on her knees, heart hammering. Harris approached quietly. "You're relentless," he said. "I don't know how you do it." She shook her head. "Not relentless, necessary." Even as the team caught their breath, Lena's mind worked ahead. The enemy wasn't gone. They regroup. They'd chase. Every moment of reprieve was temporary, but the immediate threat was mitigated thanks to her guidance. Ruiz appeared from behind a tree, eyes scanning the ridge. "Good work, Captain. Alpha made it through intact." Lena's gaze lingered on the valley floor, scarred, battered, but alive, for now. She thought of the men who had laughed at her at the briefing table, dismissing her insights, mocking her presence. They hadn't understood then, but now they saw, if only vaguely, the truth. Experience wasn't measured by rank or loudness or bravado. Sometimes it came in quiet voices, voices they had ignored. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. Nature, danger, and human error had converged to reveal the thin line between survival and disaster. And at the center of that line, silent but unyielding, was Lena. She watched as Alpha regrouped, tending to the wounded, checking positions, preparing for the next phase. Harris stood beside her, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, an understanding of shared survival, of trust earned in fire. A faint smile crossed Lena's face. Not pride, not yet, just recognition of the moment, of what had been achieved. The valley was quiet now, broken only by the distant drip of water from the trees and the soft rustle of leaves. Yet Lena knew the next danger was always waiting, and that survival wasn't about luck. It was about awareness, timing, and courage. She traced the path ahead with her eyes, mentally mapping the safest route for the next movement. Every instruction she would give, every decision she would make, could mean life or death. She felt the weight of it, not a burden but a responsibility. And as the wind shifted through the grove, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth, Lena allowed herself a single, fleeting thought. Being ignored once doesn't define the mission. Acting when it matters does. Harris placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "We should move," he said. She nodded. The mission wasn't over, not by far. But for the first time she felt the quiet power of being heard, even if only through action. The sun peeked over the horizon, golden light spilling into the valley. Shadows receded. A bird called, its song tentative but insistent, carrying across the damp air. Lena allowed herself a moment to watch it, a reminder that life persisted even in the harshest conditions. The enemy could still strike. Betrayal, misfortune, miscommunication, all still loomed. But Lena had acted when it mattered most, and that, she realized, was the difference between survival and defeat. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the calm before the storm, the preparation before action. And as Alpha Team moved forward under her guidance, she knew one thing with certainty. The voice no one expected to hear was now the one everyone would follow when it truly counted. How do you lead when no one listens until it's too late? The valley stretched ahead, deceptive in its calm. The storm had passed, leaving the ground slick and treacherous, the air heavy with moisture and tension. Lena scanned the horizon, every ridge, every boulder, every shadow a potential threat. Alpha Team followed cautiously, wounded men supported by their comrades, eyes darting to every movement. Harris walked beside her, silent for once, his focus entirely on the path ahead. They had survived so far because of her guidance, but Lena knew survival wasn't over. The enemy was still out there, watching, waiting. "Captain," Harris said quietly, "do you think they'll come after us again?" She didn't answer immediately. The question was heavy and the answer was uncertain. She could see the possibilities: an ambush at the river bend, snipers on the ridge, traps in the underbrush. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she couldn't show fear. "They might," she said finally, "but we're not walking blindly." The team advanced, moving like shadows among shadows. Rainwater dripped from leaves, pooling in depressions, soaking boots and clothes. Every footstep needed to be calculated, every movement deliberate. Lena's senses were stretched to their limits: sight, sound, touch, even smell alert for anomalies. A subtle shift in the wind brought the faint scent of smoke. Lena froze, hand raised. Harris mirrored her stance. "Enemy," she whispered. "Possibly a forward observation point. Stay low, move slow." The squad obeyed. Silence enveloped them, broken only by the occasional drip of water or the soft groan of distant rocks shifting. Lena's pulse was steady, but her mind raced. Every instinct honed by years of training and loss was on high alert. They rounded a bend in the ridge and found fresh tracks, boots pressed deep into mud, disrupted foliage indicating movement from the enemy. Lena knelt, examining them carefully. "Two groups," she murmured, "separated by roughly 50 meters. If we push Alpha too fast, they'll be split and vulnerable." Harris looked at her, eyes wide. "What do we do?" "We control the pace," Lena replied. "We create the illusion of hesitation. We force them to react to us, not the other way around." They pressed forward slowly. The enemy tracks led to a series of ridges overlooking the valley floor, perfect vantage points for snipers or ambushes. Lena motioned for Alpha to spread out in a staggered line, keeping cover between them and maintaining visual contact. A sharp crack, too precise to be natural. A sniper hidden among the trees. Lena flattened against a boulder, signaling Alpha to take cover. The sniper fired again, and bullets pinged off rocks dangerously close. Harris returned fire, careful to maintain suppression without giving away their exact location. She assessed the angles quickly, calculating safe paths for Alpha to advance while keeping herself and Harris relatively protected. Each decision was critical. One miscalculation could mean death. "Alpha," she said over comms, voice steady despite the tension, "move in a wedge formation. 3 paces between each of you. Stop, cover, move." The team obeyed, moving as if choreographed, bullets whistling past, sparks flying against stone. Lena's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. Every order, every gesture was precise, practiced, vital. Harris whispered, "You're amazing. How do you do it?" She shook her head. I survived, that's enough." Lightning forked across the distant ridge, illuminating the valley. In that brief flash, Lena saw enemy figures scrambling for higher ground, confused by the coordinated advance. The opening she had anticipated appeared. "Move now," she commanded. Alpha surged forward, covering each other, dragging the wounded to relative safety. The enemy fired sporadically but could not adapt quickly enough. Lena's strategy, built on observation, timing, and patience, gave them the advantage. Hours passed like minutes. Rain continued to fall lightly, cooling sweat-streaked faces, soaking uniforms, and turning the earth into treacherous mud. Lena guided Alpha with subtle hand signals and short, precise commands over comms. Each word was a lifeline. The hidden sniper shifted again. Lena detected the subtle movement, her eyes narrowing. She directed Harris to fire suppressive shots in a specific arc, creating the illusion of multiple positions. The sniper hesitated, then retreated slightly. The team advanced another 100 meters, gaining higher ground, slowly closing the gap to the extraction point. Lena's muscles burned, her mind sharp and relentless. Every movement had been anticipated, every action accounted for. Finally, they reached a natural barrier, a dense thicket providing cover from the ridge snipers. Alpha collapsed behind it, catching their breath, tending to wounds. The storm had left the valley battered but alive. Lena allowed herself a moment to exhale. Relief was fleeting, though. Her gaze swept the horizon. The enemy had been temporarily outmaneuvered, but the threat persisted. Ruiz approached, eyes scanning. Captain Ward, Alpha made it intact. Good work. She didn't smile. Action, not recognition, was what mattered. Pride would wait. Survival required focus, not celebration. Harris glanced at her, admiration clear but quiet. You saved them again. She shook her head. I just did what needed to be done. The valley fell silent, the storm's remnants dripping from leaves and branches. Birds began tentatively calling, signaling the return of life. Lena watched, letting the moment fill her chest with fragile relief. Yet she knew this calm was temporary. The enemy was still out there, regrouping. Betrayal, fatigue, and unforeseen threats were constant companions. Her voice, once ignored, had proven crucial, but it was far from the end. She traced the path forward with her eyes, mapping safe routes, cover points, and potential threats. Every decision, every signal, every order could mean the difference between life and death. Harris placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. We should move, extraction's not far. She nodded. The mission was not complete, not by a long shot. But for the first time, she felt the quiet power of being trusted, of being heard when it truly counted. As the sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across the valley, Lena allowed herself a fleeting thought. Being ignored doesn't define you. Acting when it matters does. Alpha Team moved under her guidance, each step deliberate, each breath measured. They were battered, wary, and exhausted, but alive. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the heaviest responsibility. And sometimes that responsibility is the only thing standing between life and death. Lena inhaled the damp, pine-scented air, letting it fill her lungs. The storm had passed. The valley was scarred but breathing, and she was ready. Because she had learned long ago, when no one listens, action speaks louder than words. Why does fear linger, even when the immediate danger passes? The valley lay before them like a scar, battered by storm, gunfire, and human error. Lena's eyes swept the terrain, noting every ridge, boulder, and shadow. Alpha Team followed, exhausted but determined, their steps careful, deliberate. Every movement was measured, every breath could betray them. Harris walked beside Lena, his boots sinking into the wet soil. We're almost at the extraction point, he said, voice low, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Lena didn't respond. Her mind was elsewhere, tracing routes, calculating angles, anticipating threats. She had guided them this far. Every step now had to count. One misstep, one moment of hesitation could undo all of it. They reached the final ridge before the extraction zone. From here, the clearing below was visible. The helicopter would land there, but only if they made it. And the enemy still had eyes in the valley, watching, waiting. Captain, Harris whispered, they're regrouping. I can see movement along the far ridge. Lena's heart tightened. Snipers. Maybe, or scouts. Either way, they'll see us if we move too soon. She scanned the clearing, noting trees and boulders that could provide cover. The wounded were near exhaustion. Alpha couldn't wait much longer. Timing is everything, she muttered, more to herself than to Harris. A sudden rustle in the underbrush caught her attention. Her hand instinctively went to her sidearm. One enemy operative emerged, a lone figure unaware they were spotted. Lena held her breath, considering options. "Take the shot," Harris asked softly. "No," she said, "we can use this." The figure paused, scanning, then moved on. Lena exhaled. Every step, every decision had to be precise. They couldn't afford mistakes. She keyed the comms. "Alpha, final approach. Use the boulders as cover, stay low, timing is critical, move on my mark." The team obeyed, advancing slowly, methodically, shadows in shadows. Lena watched, heart hammering, as every instruction translated into survival. Then a sudden flare erupted from the far ridge. Enemy fire followed immediately, bullets striking close to Alpha. Lena's pulse quickened. This was the test, the moment when training, instinct, and courage would collide. "Move, move, move," she shouted over the comms. Harris opened fire, careful to suppress without revealing their exact location. Lena guided Alpha with gestures, whispers, subtle signals, each one critical. The wounded were dragged to cover. Every action counted. A sniper's shot cracked, dangerously close. Lena's mind raced, calculating the trajectory, predicting the enemy's next move. She pointed to a fallen tree, signaling Alpha to use it as cover. They complied instantly. The sniper's aim was foiled. Alpha pressed forward, inching toward the extraction zone. Another shot, this one missed by inches. Lena's stomach dropped, but her hands remained steady. Every instruction, every gesture, every breath was vital. Finally, they reached a natural barrier, thick underbrush shielding them from the ridge snipers. Alpha team collapsed behind it, catching their breath. The wounded were stabilized, their faces pale but alive. "Captain Ward," Ruiz said, emerging from cover, eyes scanning the clearing. "Alpha made it, all of them." Lena's chest tightened. Relief, exhaustion, pride, and sorrow mingled into a heavy ache. She had guided them through fire, storm, and uncertainty. She had done what no one at the briefing table had expected. Yet the mission wasn't over. The extraction helicopter still had to land, and the enemy still lingered. Lena allowed herself a brief moment to survey the valley, noting enemy positions, potential ambush points, and the safest path to the clearing. Harris approached. "We can't wait long, they'll be back." She nodded. "I know, everyone get ready, we move on my count." The team readied themselves, adjusting gear, checking weapons, and bracing for the final dash. Lena's mind was a calm storm, every calculation precise, every instinct tuned. 3, 2, 1, go," she shouted. Alpha surged forward, sprinting from cover to cover. Bullets whizzed past, striking rocks and trees. Harris provided suppressive fire, covering their advance. Lena led them, guiding every step, every movement. The helicopter's blades appeared in the clearing, slicing through the early morning mist. Extraction was in sight. A sniper fired from the ridge. Lena dove, signaling Alpha to drop low. Harris returned fire, pinning the enemy. The team surged forward, moving as one coordinated unit. Lena's heart raced. They were close, but every second was fragile, every movement dangerous. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, but she didn't falter. Finally, Alpha reached the clearing. The helicopter descended, rotors churning the mist into spiraling eddies. The wounded were lifted onto stretchers, then into the aircraft. Harris glanced at Lena. "We made it." She nodded, voice hoarse. "Not yet, I go last." Lena sprinted the final stretch, dodging sniper fire, diving behind rocks as the helicopter hovered. Harris provided covering fire. Her boots splashed in the muddy water, heart pounding, lungs burning. The helicopter's door opened, waiting. She jumped inside, breathless, soaked, but alive. As the aircraft lifted, ascending over the valley, Lena allowed herself a moment to look back. The scarred terrain stretched below, silent witnesses to the chaos, courage, and sacrifice. Ruiz, Harris, and the remaining team members exhaled, relief etched across their faces. Alpha was safe. The mission had succeeded, not because of luck, but because one voice, long ignored, had guided them when it mattered most. Lena sank into a seat, closing her eyes. Exhaustion crashed over her, but relief followed close behind. The storm had passed, the immediate danger had ended, and yet the memory of every shot fired, every life saved, every moment of fear would remain. The helicopter flew toward the base, carrying the team out of the valley. Lena's thoughts drifted to Michael, to the briefing table where she had been dismissed, to every moment that had led her here. Sometimes she realized dignity doesn't speak. It acts, it guides, it protects. As the valley receded below, shrouded in mist and shadow, Lena allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She had been ignored once. She would never be ignored again. Because action, courage, and unwavering focus had a voice far louder than any words. And today, that voice had saved lives. The sun broke fully over the horizon, casting long rays across the landscape. The valley was quiet now, scarred but alive. The storm was gone, but its lessons remained. And so did Lena, strong, silent, unyielding, a voice no one had expected, and yet the one they all needed. Why does the quietest voice echo the longest after the storm has passed? The helicopter hummed steadily over the valley, its blades slicing through the morning mist. Inside, the air was thick with exhaustion, sweat, and the faint metallic scent of gunfire that clung stubbornly to uniforms. Alpha Team sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of the night pressing on their shoulders. Lena leaned back, eyes scanning the receding valley below, scarred, battered, and broken in places, but alive. It struck her how fragile life was, how quickly chaos could rearrange everything. One misstep, one ignored voice, one failed calculation, and it would have been over. Harris broke the silence, voice low, hesitant. "Captain, I thank you for everything. You saved us." She didn't respond immediately. Words felt inadequate. Her mind replayed every detail of the night. The flares, the sniper fire, the screams, the calculated movements that kept them alive. Every moment had demanded total focus, and still, the memory of being ignored at the briefing table lingered like a shadow. "I didn't save you," she said finally. "I just acted. That's all anyone could do." Harris shook his head. "No, you did more than act. You led. You saw what no one else saw. You made the difference." She swallowed, feeling the emotion rise. Relief, pride, exhaustion, and annoying sadness. They were alive. That should have been enough. And yet, the valley below whispered of what had been lost, of the lives that hung by a thread, of the stakes that never truly left even after the storm ended. The helicopter dipped slightly as the pilot adjusted for wind. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the vibration of the rotors beneath her, the gentle sway of the cabin, and the collective breathing of a team she had guided through danger. She thought of Michael, how he had taught her to notice the unseen, the overlooked, the subtle details others dismissed, how he had reminded her that every voice mattered, even the quiet ones, even hers. That lesson had never felt more real than in these past hours. Outside the window, the valley stretched endlessly, shrouded in mist. Trees swayed gently, the earth glistening from rain. Smoke from small fires still rose, curling into the sky, silent witnesses to the chaos and courage below. Lena's hand brushed against her vest, feeling the weight of equipment, of responsibility. Every tool, every weapon, every signal device had been used with precision. But the real weight was not physical. It was moral, emotional, and psychological. It was the responsibility of knowing she had been the voice no one expected. Harris leaned closer, voice quieter now. "Do you ever think they'll understand? Those who ignored you, those at the briefing?" She considered this. Her eyes drifted back to the valley. "Maybe," she said slowly, "but it doesn't matter. They heard me when it counted. That's enough. That's all that matters." A faint rustle of movement near the cabin door drew her attention. Ruiz stood there, silent, watching, eyes sharp but unreadable. "Good work, Captain Ward. You handled this with precision and clarity. They all made it because of you." Lena nodded, letting the acknowledgement settle quietly. It wasn't pride that filled her, it was something subtler, validation. The kind that comes not from applause, but from knowing the right choices were made when lives depended on them. The helicopter leveled out, approaching the extraction point. Lena observed the landing zone carefully, noting debris, potential hazards, and escape routes. Every detail mattered. Every second could be decisive. As the aircraft descended, the valley below became clearer. Soldiers moved cautiously, guiding the helicopter to a safe clearing. Lena could see their relief mirrored in the eyes of Alpha Team. For them, the mission was over. For her, the lessons of the night lingered, etched into memory. The landing was smooth but tense. The rotors kicked up mud and leaves, and Lena helped guide the wounded down, signaling for care and caution. Every movement was deliberate, precise, necessary. Once on solid ground, Lena allowed herself a moment to breathe. Rainwater ran down her face, her uniform was soaked, and mud clung stubbornly to boots and gloves. But she was alive. So were her team. That was enough. Harris approached, face serious but grateful. "Captain, you were right about everything. You saw what no one else did and you guided us. We owe you our lives." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't owe me anything. Just remember to trust the quiet voices next time. Sometimes they see more than the loudest ones." Ruiz joined them, surveying the valley one last time. "You've earned every bit of respect tonight, Captain. Not because of rank, not because of orders, but because of action. That's leadership." Lena allowed herself a small smile, fleeting but genuine. Recognition was never her goal, but acknowledgement was its own quiet reward. The sun fully emerged, casting golden light across the valley. Shadows receded, leaving behind clarity and a sense of fragile calm. Birds called tentatively, insects returned to life, and the earth exhaled after the storm. Lena's gaze lingered on the horizon. This valley would heal. The wounded would recover. The enemy would regroup, but she had acted decisively when it mattered most, and that would not be forgotten. She knelt briefly, brushing mud from a boulder where a fallen comrade had shielded a teammate. A silent gesture of respect. Every life mattered. Every action mattered. Harris spoke softly beside her. "What now?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "Now we move forward, we learn, we survive, and we make sure that the next time no one ignores the voices that matter." A breeze swept through the valley, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and pine. Lena closed her eyes, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of rotors. Silence had returned, but it was not empty. It was alive with memory, with lessons, with the quiet dignity of those who acted when words failed. The team regrouped, ready for debriefing, ready for rest, ready for whatever came next. Lena remained momentarily, letting the valley speak to her, teaching her the final lesson of the night. Courage is not always loud. Heroism does not always demand applause. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that quiet action, in the moments unseen by most, lives are saved, truths are revealed, and respect, earned silently, endures far longer than words ever could. As the helicopter lifted again, Lena looked once more at the valley, the scars of the night still visible but softened by sunlight. She felt a sense of closure, yet understood that life, like missions, demanded vigilance, focus, and courage. And she would meet each challenge, voice steady, actions precise, heart resolute. Because sometimes, the one voice no one expects is the one everyone needs. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and pine. The valley receded behind her. Silence stretched ahead. Lena closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing exhaustion and relief to wash over her. The mission was over, but the lesson remained, etched into every thought, every movement, every choice. Dignity is not in recognition. It is in action, and those who act, even when ignored, leave a mark no one forgets. She opened her eyes, steady and determined, ready for whatever came next. The valley lay behind, the helicopter hummed forward, and in the quiet, unspoken understanding between the surviving team members, the weight of the night settled. Lives were spared, trust had been earned, and a quiet voice, once ignored, had become the defining force of survival. The sun reflected on the wet earth one last time, golden and piercing, and Lena knew she had fulfilled the mission, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was necessary, because she had no other choice, and sometimes that is enough. Silence lingered, heavy but comforting, as the helicopter carried them away. The valley would heal, the team would heal, and the voice that had once been ignored would echo in memory, in respect, and in quiet admiration, forever.